will each take about 200 million steps in our lifetime. But how on earth did following my grandmother's footsteps lead me here? Katmai, Alaska, home to some of the most remote beaches on Earth. Or at least, so I thought. I remember the first time that I saw Katmai. It was in my Grandma Lou's sketchbook. She traveled all over the world making sketches in wild places that she visited, including Alaska, where I call home. But of all the 6,000 sketches that she left behind, the Katmai one stuck out in my memory, and I'm not sure if it was the bears or the landscape or maybe just those big, wide open beaches. Whatever it was, there's just something special that bring those sketches to life, unlike anywhere else. Now that I have a little kid of my own, I wanted to go follow in my grandmother's footsteps and maybe bring back some sketches for my little one. Go see if those wild places were still out there.
Follow me now, there is somewhere I want to go. You know me well, and that is how it is, it is, it is. You don't know how this came to be.
Lou and her sketchbook caught a ride to Katmai with a group of geologists. I would get the opportunity to travel with a whole different kind of group. This boat was packed with engineers, marine biologists, economists, even a surfer, all headed to these remote beaches in search of one thing: plastics, which had apparently been washing up from all over the world. I'd like to learn more about this, but I'm not a scientist. All I had was a sketchbook, a brush, a watercolor palette, and a handful of big sheets of paper, which I was gonna have to think carefully about how to use, because there were so many amazing things to sketch already.
We've got fin whales on the starboard side, fin whales.
That was Captain Andy, the one who would get us to Katmai. For his day job, he takes people to visit the enormous bears that live on this coast. But his real passion is dealing with something much more dangerous out here.
We're on our way to Katmai, back at our favorite line of work, which is ocean plastics.
At first, I didn't fully understand why everyone on this boat thought these plastics would be so dangerous to a place like this. I mean, they're not a messy accident like an oil spill, or a giant expensive climate disaster like a hurricane or a wildfire. It seemed like they were just little pieces of plastic that were washing up from somewhere else. So unless a bear choked on one, or a whale got tangled in a net, it was hard to see how they could affect somewhere this huge. Before I could ask any more questions to Andy or anyone else on this boat, we arrived at a place that I'd seen before, in my grandmother's sketchbook. Like my grandmother, I've traveled all over the world, yet there's just something about this place that feels entirely unique. It's the ancestral homeland of the Alutiiq, it's the spawning ground of salmon, the feeding ground of whales, and the entire world of the bears, wolves, moose, foxes, and everything else that lives here. Or maybe it's all of that together that makes it so special. And I had no idea where to start sketching. But right now, it was time to get to work. Because the first order of business was to help this crew and basically become a reverse pirate, where we would remove buried trash instead of treasure, and then mark the clean spot on the map with a giant X. At first, I had thought we had landed on one of those spots. This beach seemed untouched. However, once I knew where to look, I began to see it everywhere. I used to think ocean plastic had nothing to do with me. I don't live on the beach, I don't toss my litter into the sea. Yet we were finding familiar things that I've definitely had and thrown away in my own life. So how could something like that end up somewhere like here? While picking this stuff up, I learned that there are tons of ways our trash can end up in the ocean. And not just the tragic ones that we see on the news, like hurricanes, tsunamis, or floods, where people's entire lives are pushed into the sea. Some of it, like shipping and manufacturing, I'll just never see. And then there's the millions of tiny moments where it just slips through the cracks, being washed into a gutter or a stream or a river, until eventually it reaches the ocean, where currents will take it all over the world, including wild places like Katmai. It all made sense on a map, but actually seeing these household things in a place like this just didn't feel right. But there was so much that soon made a pile big enough we had to call the skiff to bring it back to the boat. So while we waited for one of the locals to inspect our work, I had time for a quick sketch, which is where I saw my great white whale. Or at least size 11 white whale. It wasn't that I was surprised to see a shoe with everything else. After all, we do produce over 20 billion pairs of shoes on Earth per year, which is enough to make a stack that would reach the moon. Twice. And there's already a couple footprints there.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This footprint felt different because I could picture my own shoes making a similar journey. I've had dozens of pairs of shoes in my life, and I can only account for the ones I still have in my closet. The last person who wore this is probably still out there and has no idea how far their shoe has come. I mean, this right here could be a sea turtle bite mark. And we're in Alaska. Let that sink in. But do I currently have shoes making a solo journey, maybe past icebergs or some tropical ocean, making footprints in some far-off beach that I'll never visit? It's entirely possible. But before I could really let my mind go there,
Oh, found another one.
we began to find these shoes everywhere. And it started to become apparent that there's a lot of people out there who have made footprints on Katmai without ever visiting.
Oh, how many shoes in my life? Man, a bunch. I used to collect Jordans, so I used to love Jordans.
Rachel was the one who was coming to pick up the trash with the skiff. She's also the ship's engineer, and on her off-season, she takes people to remote beaches in Alaska to surf some of the coldest waves on Earth.
Surfing in Alaska is I don't know. I don't think there's anything quite like it. For one thing, there's nobody out with you. It's just kind of you and just these rugged, remote beaches where you are not going to see another human. But you then see all of the influences of people as their trash. I'd say you'd be hard-pressed to find a beach in Alaska that has no sign of debris or human influence on it, despite the fact that they might be fully uninhabited.
I wanted to sketch these beautiful, natural beaches like my grandmother had, but I couldn't unsee this trash, and I had a hard time focusing on anything else. Maybe once they were clean, I'd be able to sketch the view, but for now, I was just going to clean up as much as I could, stopping only to sketch the shoes that I found.
Oh, it wasn't bad, wasn't it good? Oh, it was a moment of life. We were just two little humans walking to the end of the night. Oh, it's been a ride. I think I have survived, but I don't know if without your love.
Hey, I found half a sole for you. It looks very degraded, but yes, here's the heel.
This is Peyton. We were cleaning up pretty close to each other because, bears. But between her science and her running background, she turned my whole perspective upside down.
So a lot of what we've seen here is that we've seen a lot of soles left over, and whereas the rest of the shoe may still be floating out. in the ocean or has sunk down to the bottom.
Teams of scientists have estimated that there are millions of tons of plastics on the ocean floor, which means that we're just seeing a fraction of what's out there for now. Because it's the plastics that we didn't find that should worry us. Because once these break apart, they become a real problem.
It can be broken down, but it's just going to be broken down into tinier and tinier and tinier plastic fragments, and it just accumulates. And I think a lot of the fear is also that we don't know all of the implications to different animals as well and to ourselves in terms of like having this unnatural material in our bodies.
But what kind of change could microplastics actually make? I mean, they're just tiny little invisible particles in the water. But then again, so are phytoplankton, which are actually a huge deal. They're these little tiny microscopic plants that live in the ocean, and they take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. But there are so many of them that together they produce more than twice as much oxygen as all of the trees and land plants on Earth combined. It basically means that every other breath you breathe is thanks to them. But even though there's so many of them to do this, in some parts of the ocean, they are outnumbered by microplastics, 6 to 1.
Yeah, if we think about like the size of those plastics and the size of these animals and just like the sheer scale of change that they can create on the planet, and then thinking about them interacting with each other.
And that's just the marine debris that's already broken into microplastics so far. Stuff that's already been in the ocean for years, if not decades. And more gets added every second.
Which is crazy, because plastics haven't been around for that long.
And whether it's an unaccounted for bottle or buoy or shoe, if it can't break down, it will just keep on breaking up until it finds itself in a new home.
So ultimately, it feels like at this point, all of my shoes would end up being in a place like this, which is really sad to think about.
I was beginning to see what Peyton was talking about. These shoes wouldn't just end up on this landscape. Eventually, they would end up in it. I just wanted to follow in my grandmother's footsteps, but it was all so messy now. I didn't see how one person could hope to make a difference in any of this.
Here's your shoe.
There must have been something that kept people like Captain Andy coming back.
I was guiding a trip at the time. Marine debris and ocean plastics were sort of just part of the tour, where it's like, oh yeah, it's everywhere. You'll get used to it. Just think of it as part of the landscape, but of course, it really doesn't sit right to think that. That was kind of the beginning of a story, my story with ocean plastics, that it's so durable. All these properties we love about it make it, you know, all the more hazardous and long-lasting impacts in the environment. Now it's in the water column, it's in the snowpack, and it's in us. Lee, we underestimated this beach. I think we'll need, just to be safe, maybe 4 more super sacks.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely can be a feeling of a cycle of futility. Pick things up from beach, bring stuff onto the boat, move to a hold, take out of a hold, get off the boat, and then rinse and repeat.
Still, on some trips, they'll recover as much as 20,000 pounds of ocean plastic, all of which goes back on this boat.
Because it does just keep coming. You can spend however many hours getting things sorted and finished, and then just another huge wave of bags will come on for you to resort. But, you know, you can just be hopeful, I guess, that there is a possibility of at least lessening it.
Hope seemed kind of like a thin and flimsy tool to use against a problem as big as this. But I wasn't one to speak. I was using paper, or at least I was using paper. This was going to be my last sketch. Not because I had given up, or run out of shoes, but because I'd almost filled up my entire sketchbook with these footprints. And I hadn't even made a single painting of a landscape or a bear or anything wild out here like my grandmother had before. I would be bringing back my kiddo a sketchbook full of trash. And I know none of this was on purpose. No one could have known their footprint would end up in a place like this. But it still made me so mad. I was mad that the plastics would just keep on floating up, even after we leave. And I was mad that basically no one knew that the trash was ending up here. And mad that I wanted to throw everything back into the ocean and let it wash up in somebody else's backyard. But also mad because I know that would never work. Even if I could throw that shoe way out of sight, I know that eventually it would be right back here. This time in more pieces, even harder to deal with than it was before. So what do I do when it feels like everything I do will make some negative impact somewhere else in the world? But my grandmother would have told me that it goes in both directions. Because those positive steps we take, well, those steps, they can reach just as far. I was doing exactly what I needed to. And I finally knew what to do with those big sheets of paper.
One, two, three, and all is alright. And I hope that it's light. 1, 2, 3, and all is alright. And I hope. Big trees, we're running out of steam. Say bye or say hello. The bright lights, we're running in the night. We're running. 1, 2, 3, and all is alright. And I hope that it's light. 1, 2, 3, and all is alright. And I hope.
Just like my grandmother, decades earlier, I was heading home with a full sketchbook. I mean, my sketches didn't look anything like hers, but somehow they were still inspired by the exact same place.
You can see the work we did on the map, on the little X's, and they start to look like the coast of Katmai. And I'd like to go back and add more X's. Okay, good morning, everybody. The hour is near. Welcome back to Kodiak. Everything we put on this boat in the past week has got to come off in the next 2 hours.
When almost said and done, that little X on the map turned out to be over 20,000 pounds of ocean plastic, an entire super sack of shoes, and a full sketchbook of footprints. It might not be anywhere close to the 14 million tons that will end up in the ocean this year, but it still counts as a step forward.
I saw through her eyes. I asked if the tide was coming in or the land was going out to sea. We were not real until we stood beside the ocean. We could not feel until we swallowed the sea. Then we'd understand where every river will end. We were not real until we stood by the ocean. There's no difference between that child and me. We float in the bay in a tiny birch basket. We'll all float away in a tiny birch basket. We'll all float away in a tiny birch basket.
Oh, it wasn't bad, wasn't it good? Oh, it was a moment of life. We were just two little humans walking to the end of the night. Oh, it's been a ride. I think I have survived.